Welcome to another episode of Feature from the Black Lagoon. I'm your host, Big Al. When mankind split the atom and developed nuclear weapons, it gifted science fiction a new plot device: radiation. Whether it was juicing up the radioactive ants in them or waking up a sleepy Rhedosaurus and beasts from 20,000 fathoms, nuclear tests caused all sorts of abominations. These hulking monstrosities served as a metaphor for man's hubris. This idea was portrayed most notably in the 1954 film Gojira, or Godzilla as most people know him, but we're going to save that discussion for another time. For today's show, I want to talk about 1955's Tarantula, or as the title suggests, Tarantula! Tarantula tells the story of a giant radioactive arachnid that terrorizes the American Southwest.
The movie starts with a disfigured man in his PJs wandering through the desert in a very Twilight Zone-esque cold open.
Oh, God! It's a big man!
After finding the man's body, Sheriff Andrews, played by Nestor Paiva, believes him to be Eric Jacobs, a local biologist. The sheriff calls Dr. Matt Hastings to determine the man's cause of death. Hastings, played by John Agar, believes that the death was the result of acromegalia, but seems suspicious on how quickly the disease had progressed. A colleague of Jacobs, Professor Deemer, swoops in and confirms the acromegalia. He tells them that the symptoms had started a mere 4 days ago. Deemer, played by Leo Carroll, refuses to allow an autopsy on Jacobs, much to the chagrin of Dr. Hastings. Back at his lab, Professor Deemer is developing a super nutrient that turns normal animals gigantic. However, his secret formula ain't too secret, because we know it's chock full of radioactive isotopes. Among the giant animals is an agitated arachnid, whom I've decided to name Terry. While he's busy sciencing, Professor Deemer is jumped by this Rocky Dennis-looking fella. During the struggle, a fire starts in the lab and Terry's glass cage is broken. He then proceeds to make the slowest escape of all time. The professor is then knocked unconscious and gets a syringe full of the super nutrient. Maybe the CDC should start using this method on anti-vaxxers. Shortly after, the attacker decides to just fall over and die. We're then introduced to the movie's love interest, Stephanie Clayton, played by the lovely Mara Corday. Stephanie, better known as Steve, is a biology student that has been hired as Deemer's new lab assistant, and his housekeeper for some reason. Meanwhile, Terry is roaming the desert causing all kinds of havoc, killing cows, horses, and even the occasional rancher. I want to applaud this movie for its special effects, especially for the time. They filmed a real tarantula and then superimposed the footage over the shots of the open desert, thus creating my pal Terry.
They probably used this technique because it was a whole lot cheaper than bioengineering a real giant spider. Of course, nowadays you could just get them off the web. I think the special effects actually benefited from being in black and white, because if it was in color, that spider would look like a giant-ass turd.
Since Terry didn't have any older brothers to teach him how to use a sock, he just sprays his venom all over the place. What the fuck, Doc? Why would your first instinct be to taste it? How is this dude a doctor? Anyways, they take the venom sample to Deemer for analysis, but find out he's sporting that Rocky Dennis look too. Deemer then tells him that his two assistants had injected themselves with the serum in order to test its effects on the human body, thus resulting in the acromegalia and their eventual deaths. The professor also tells him of a giant-ass spider he had assumed that had burned up in the lab fire. The doc decides to take the venom sample to Phoenix for an analysis. The scientist confirms that it is tarantula venom, but he's never seen this quantity before. Like any good college educator, instead of an actual lesson plan, he just throws on a video. What a dick. While the doc is busy watching dated-ass memes, Terry decides to drop by the Deemer's house. Upset that he didn't get an invite to the slumber party, he decides to wreck the place and presumably eats Dr. Deemer. Now that the secret's out, the gang sets out to kill the giant menace. Unfortunately for them, even dynamite don't do shit to my man Terry. When all hope seems lost, a squadron of fighter jets led by an unknown at the time Clint Eastwood come packing the heat. They drop enough napalm to give Colonel Kilgore a hard-on.
Go ahead. Make my day.
As the movie ends, we say goodbye to my boy Terry. Rest in peace, buddy. $5 says Hastings tries to taste it.
While I enjoyed this movie ending, I really think the cast could have wrapped this thing up a lot sooner if they would have hired Dilbert from Arachnophobia.
Rock and roll.
Or better yet, inject him with some of that radioactive isotope and he'd just crunch the damn thing. After it's all said and done, I really enjoy this movie. Considering that it was made 1955, I think the special effects actually hold up pretty well. With some pretty good acting and some really cool special effects, I'd give Tarantula 4 dead cows out of 5. That's going to wrap things up for us today, folks. This has been Feature from the Black Lagoon. I'm Big Al. See you next time.